Talking about you got this and you got that, and you gonna murder this one and murder that one. Talking all that bullshit. I'ma put it to you like this, yo.
This is for the nerds, this is for the brainiacs, this what we deserve. Go ahead and play it back, you ain't gonna touch me, you not gonna do nothing, you are not above me. I bet you wish you was me, I know it, I know.
What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the Only Friends podcast. You know what time it is. It's Wednesdays, baby. It's Strat Chat Wednesday. More importantly, it's NHL season. Let's go, Benz.
Clearly, it's NHL season.
Yeah.
They blew it.
I don't want to hear from you.
What's the matter?
Fucking Homer. I don't want to hear from you.
What's
Look
the
at
problem?
you. You sell out.
Wait, our lower thirds are flipped.
Who cares?
I'm Brian today.
Look at him.
Oh.
He's sold out.
Sell out.
He's Yinzer adjacent now.
Well, I didn't really.
What's the problem?
If I'm Brian, I didn't
I'm
sell
not allowed
out.
to root for this team right here.
You're not doing anything wrong. You're me today
He's a bandwagon guy.
Why am I you?
because your lower third says Landon Tice.
Oh, that's okay.
That means he's not selling out.
Right, Landon is.
Yeah, he is. You be a Panthers fan.
That's right.
I root for the Penguins.
Fucking sell out.
No. You do with the Penguins what I do with the Knights. Like, am I happy they won the Stanley Cup? Sure, good for them. But was it the Penguins? No.
I'm not that big of a hockey fan anyway, all the way around anyway, so it just doesn't matter.
This is what's wrong with you.
This is like what
Right.
you do with the Raiders, with the Steelers.
Oh,
I do
hate the
enjoy
Raiders.
going to games, right? So it's like I'm not going to be going to any Penguin games anytime soon. So
Play the Knights.
yeah, once a year.
So where does your loyalty stand?
What do you wear to that game?
Here we go, Steelers.
Yeah, you got to get like a half and half jersey.
I'm gonna wear. I have like a bunch of Penguin hoodies. I'll wear one tomorrow.
Just get like a something that's like
Berkey.
a mixture of like that, the black, but also like a little bit of gold, a little bit of yellow, a little
Nobody
bit
can
of
really
white.
tell.
Like, yeah, exactly. You just like root for either one, whoever's winning.
I mean, I'm black. I bleed black and gold, baby. I bleed black and gold. I don't know what to tell you.
Black and something.
So disappointing.
That's your shirt is yellow.
Yeah, so here's the thing. For many moons, we were considered to be black and gold. And this is technically goldenrod. Like, remember the Crayola crayons?
Yes.
You know, you get all the...
I know my crayons
This is goldenrod. I loved goldenrod.
because of the Steelers' legacy.
Well, more importantly, because it showed up better than you know,
Okay.
that construction paper. The light colors, they don't really... But for decades, we were black and gold. The Steelers, the black and gold steel curtain. You know, that was...
Then Wiz Khalifa came along.
And Wiz Khalifa came you know what? That looks pretty fucking yellow to me, man. And being a Yinzer himself, he said, I'm going to change the culture.
Yeah,
He is?
That song's actually about a car.
Which car?
His car.
Right, but
Wait a
it
minute.
wasn't an accident.
He's really a Yinzer?
Yeah, you didn't know that?
Wow.
Born and bred.
Yeah, baby.
So now he's decided to appropriate the gold and change it to yellow.
Correct.
And here we are.
Yeah, here we are.
Yeah.
Now we are forever black and yellow.
I think it's gold because there's a soccer team in England that plays in that color and they call it gold.
Right, yeah.
There you go.
Well, it's,
Yeah.
it's very clearly not yellow, Hunt. You know, yellow doesn't pop like that.
Well, I don't really care, but I just I just know that there's a soccer team called Wolverhampton Wanderers that plays in that and they call it Old Gold. What they call
Old
it.
gold, okay. See, old gold, I would have thought would have been the Knights and Saints color.
This is like gold, like you would see.
24 karat gold.
Yeah,
Yeah. I guess
right.
that when they call it Old Gold, they're not. It's just the team that calls it that. It's like their sort of name for their uniform. So it's not that they really call the color that. I guess.
What do the Saints call their colors?
Gold.
They're black and gold, or they're gold and black?
That's a good question. I don't think they refer to
Right, they can't. How could they? They couldn't do that.
that's stamped for.
Right.
You know
They're,
what?
they're
That's
not the
great.
black and gold, but I think they're like
Great
the
question.
gold and black, maybe. Which just
Who
still
are the
doesn't-
Saints? Which city is
New
the
Orleans.
Saints? New Orleans.
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't even think they reference their call themselves
I don't have an answer.
Mardi Gras.
Again, there's a soccer team whose nickname is the Saints in England, and they play in red and white stripes. So it's all totally different.
It really doesn't matter.
Yeah.
They're bringing football to the UK, maybe?
So that's rumored. They may be taking two teams to London. They're testing it out now. Jaguars played back-to-back games the last 2 weeks. They wanted to see how much of an advantage team to be there
We found out.
Fucked around and found out the Bills got whacked.
They always came back and won, but I mean, you could just see that it just seemed that they were unprepared and a little sluggish, and the Jaguars just looked,
So now
on
there might be
point.
some more FCs.
Yeah, they play at Wembley, right? That's where they
I think so, yeah.
do the games. Yeah,
Yeah.
It's an absolutely incredible stadium.
Yeah, it looks
It's
amazing.
one of the best places to watch.
They said the
any
whole
kind of
stadium is just a
sports.
bunch of Germans who like NFL football.
It wouldn't surprise me because it's so easy to travel around Europe that
Yeah.
any big event that happens at Wembley, like you're going to get a bunch of Europeans from everywhere around.
It was kind of funny because while the Bills did not look great, it was basically a Bills home game. I mean, it was like 80% Bills fans there.
Yeah, I mean, you're in a different country, right? Like, it's just going to be whoever's popular. The Jaguars.
Right.
Although the Jaguars have played a lot in London.
They have. They always make them go over there.
They sent the shit squads early. They're like, let's see what you guys do with the bottom of our
I
barrel.
know something about the Jaguars actually, because I know the guy that owns them, his son, the guy that owns them, I forget his name. His last name is Khan. His son is called Tony Khan, who is a director of both a Premier League soccer team in the UK and the second biggest wrestling company in the world after WWE.
Really?
He,
So they
he
got-
runs AEW. So he is very heavily involved in all three of those: NFL, Premier League soccer, and wrestling. And I follow him on Twitter, and he's like promoting the Jaguars all the time. So I'm sure that they have a big interest in the UK because their owner also owns a soccer team, and they probably want to have like an overlap there.
Oh yeah, sports are big business, man.
They're a lot of money.
It's really coming. Sorry, had to fix my mic. It's really getting to the point now where they realize the global market is just massive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Premier League soccer's done that a ton. Like they market so much in India, China now. Like there's like crazy amounts of money coming in from those parts of the world.
Next step's poker. It's very
Hopefully.
clear. We're just gonna
Hopefully.
hitch a ride to the WWE
Let's
and
do it.
Yeah.
just hitch our wagon
Well,
to some of these things.
WWE just got bought out by the company that owns UFC. So the same company now owns both UFC and WWE.
Interesting.
Which
Yeah.
poker player out there in our community you think would make the best WWE star?
Oh, geez. The funny thing is, poker players are so unathletic that I feel like nobody would be able to do it.
Nah,
Yeah,
there's
no,
a
you
few.
gotta pick the one who has the best bit.
You need,
the thing is, like, do
you need personality plus
that's
a little
the
bit of
thing, like,
athleticism.
do you want to pick the person who has the most
Olivia
charisma?
would be pretty good.
the charisma, or do you want to go the
You
athleticism?
got to have it all.
know?
You got to have it
Yeah,
all.
I don't know. It's a
I think
good
it's
question.
Helmuth.
Helmuth.
Helmuth-
I don't even think he would wrestle. I think he would just like eat Big Macs in the middle of the ring.
He's 6'5", man. He could
Yeah.
wrestle.
Yeah.
Like if you
Oh,
rewind
man.
Helmuth like 30 years, he could train to be a wrestler. You know?
Yeah, those super tall guys, they don't even need to be in good shape. Like,
Oh,
when
yeah.
the Undertaker, Kane,
Yeah.
Big Show, like they just throw a
mean-
unitard on them.
I mean,
Yeah.
Nick would be pretty good.
Nick
Showman.
Oh, well, he'd be a great announcer, obviously.
Yeah.
But I mean, I think he'd just be a great character.
Yeah.
He could figure out a character that would
Yeah.
be pretty fun.
I don't know. Do you remember Big Daddy Kane?
Vaguely.
He became something else, or maybe I'm mistaking him with somebody else.
Big Daddy Kane was a rapper.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I
you're
feel
right.
like-
You're right. No.
I feel like you're
Thank
thinking
you,
of someone
Squad.
I
different.
am.
For the
He was
fact
two characters. One of them was a pimp, and I can't remember.
Are you talking about The Godfather?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, he was something else too. He was
forget.
something prior to that, but
I don't know if it's the same guy, but you might be thinking of like the voodoo guy, like Papa Shango or something.
no,
his
I
name
remember
was.
him
Oh, you remember
also.
him? Okay.
But anyway, yeah, he came back as the Godfather.
Yeah.
I could see Nick rocking that look. With
Yeah.
the cigar,
Yeah.
get him a cane.
Exactly.
And then like he comes out and like a train of women is like following him to the ring and stuff. Like, yeah, I could see that.
We reboot Val Venus.
Oh my God.
Just seems like the right thing to do at this
Don't,
point.
don't do that.
This is just
Nobody needs to
reminding
see more
me
of him.
how insane the conversation was I had with Abby about how she says anybody can be a pro wrestler.
All right. Well,
With
if you
a little
work
bit of
hard
work,
enough,
I think anybody could.
if you work hard enough,
Yeah.
anybody can do anything that they want. We've established this. All right.
But seriously, just watch 5 minutes of pro wrestling and you'll see that's not true. Like, it's insane.
I mean, I will say, like, well, because of the acting background prior, like, Logan Paul fucking killed it.
Logan Paul's, yeah, but he's an incredible athlete. Like,
Yeah.
he's got like, I can't even believe he's like a YouTube guy because he seems like somebody who's been an athlete his whole life. Like, it's wild some of the stuff he can do.
Well, he was a
Yeah.
pretty good wrestler in high school.
Oh, okay. That makes sense then.
Yeah, he and his brother, like actual wrestlers.
Yeah. A lot of the guys who are like amateur or high school wrestler guys, they make really good pro wrestlers as well.
It's like wrestling is hard enough as is professionally. Acting is hard enough as is professionally.
Yeah.
Now you have to be like pretty decent at both of them and not fuck up mid-stage in order to be good at it.
You also you're on live TV like all the time, like every single week. Like that must be so stressful just in itself. Like
We're on here every day.
Yeah, tell me
like
about it.
I'm on here once a week and I'm like, okay, I got to go out in front of a few hundred people and talk and like, what am I going to say? Like all this shit. I can't even imagine being on live TV every single week.
In front of hundreds and hundreds.
That would be like
viewers at home.
if The Rock didn't have enough viewers. Like
Right.
it's gone from millions down to hundreds.
Just The Rock workshopping his whole bit.
How many viewers do I think I have?
That's
Hundreds
incredible.
or millions.
Let's get to a little bit of news and notes that's going on around the industry. First and foremost, shout out to Pads. He won his 4th WCOOP Player of the Series.
Pads.
Congratulations, Pads.
The legend.
That was good for
Come on, the boys.
53,000 and change, as well as another 25K in leaderboard bonuses. So
He worked hard
that's
to
nice chunk of
achieve
change.
that.
Of course, well, look, the jokes are there, but like, whatever, man. Let's stick a pin in that conversation for now. I don't want to get back into it now. But yeah, I mean, that's a nice chunk of change. I don't remember there being 75K in prizes back when we were grinding these leaderboards.
Well, 75K was probably worth a lot worth a lot more back then, rather.
Right.
Sorry.
That's true, too.
So like, I don't know, but I feel like Pads and Benny Glazer are going to be the two left when the dust settles at like the kings of coops, right? Like, I mean, how many coops titles do these guys have now? It's insane.
Benny won 7 this series.
It's insane.
And didn't win Player of the Series.
Like there can't, and I don't know.
Wow.
Like I'm not exactly a mixed game expert, but there can't be anybody else who's better than Benny Glazer at mixed games as a whole. Because how much does he crush, man? Like he wins everything. It's insane.
Yeah, it is pretty crazy too when you think that, you know, not that long ago, just a year ago, he was at one of the biggest 10K no limit final tables.
Yeah, like he's such an underrated guy for like one of the best in the world. He just crushes every format. It's crazy.
He doesn't really play high rollers though, right?
I don't think so, but I feel like if he wanted to, he could.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things when you have that many disciplines. Like I think Schulman's kind of a unique unicorn in that regard. Where Chidwick would be another one.
Yeah.
Where they're just like good at all the disciplines. To both be good at all the disciplines and test the high roller scene as well. Because most of those high rollers, man, they're really cutting their teeth at big bet games.
Yeah. But I also think with Chidwick, like I don't know how much of the other games he plays anymore, right? Like he plays the PPC, but
Right.
I don't know if his record in those games is the same as Benny's,
Right.
in terms of how much he's won. Like I think it was probably more before the high roller scene really kicked off that he was playing that stuff.
Yeah,
Whereas
that's probably fair.
Benny, I feel like for 10 years has just been crushing it.
Yeah, like in most cases, people kind of make arguments to try to play the PPC if they're good at big bet games.
Yeah, there's a lot of little nuances in the structure that really advocate for if you are particularly skilled at certain big bet aspects, it's good. I remember Dan O'Brien played it, this must have been like 2011, because the no limit round had like a triple ante. Something ridiculous. It was like a massive ante. And he's like, my edge in that game alone might just be enough to justify play. Because he was like somewhat competent at Raz and some of the other games.
Just have to make sure that he doesn't fold to a almost less than a min raise for heads up in limit games.
Well, you know.
Gotta work harder.
Yeah.
Just had to fire a shot at Ryan Lang there.
Yeah,
Just,
that was
that
was really, really hurtful.
Ryan's catching strays.
What
Bad guy.
did Ryan do?
He folded.
That's fair.
The no limit guy, you gotta respect the game.
Gotta save those bets.
I don't think he's just a no limit guy.
No, he's a mixed game guy.
Yeah.
But like mostly no limit these days. Like most people. There's just more action in no limit.
Yeah, that's been true since we all got into the arena to begin with. Other thing I wanted to follow up on, last Friday, I believe it was, we did an episode following up on the GTO Wizard Fair Play check. They had released an update that allowed an expansion on the lookup where now you could look at a timestamp down to the second. You could look at turns. Well, you could always look at turns and rivers, but you could look at bet sizing. You could look at formations. You could look at what format the ranges were pulled from, et cetera, et cetera. And one of the accused, UR Nightmare, rather, was basically shown to have had a bunch of false positives. So I think there were 7 spots looked up. One was a strong correlated hit. One was a very, very poorly correlated hit. And the other 5 were like not hits at all. They were like MTT spots and heads up sit and goes and shit like that. So I wanted to bring this back up because I had spoke with him off air after the episode had aired. And he thought we were pretty fair to him, but he wanted to point out that we weren't sure if his account was banned. Like we weren't sure what Stars was currently doing. He did confirm that Stars was investigating him. They have, per their protocols, banned his account while he's being investigated. Yeah, sorry. Yeah. Suspended his account, whatever, while he's being investigated. And he noted that in the email exchange that they had, they specifically pointed to the fact that there was a lot of public scrutiny that drove this investigation to begin with. So it's only fair to him, I think, that now that we have a pretty high degree of confidence that he is not breaking any terms of service and not using GTO Wizard as RTA. Obviously, Stars should still follow through with their investigation, but I think it's important that we try to fast track this publicly as much as possible, kind of shine a light on the fact that, after doing more due diligence, the public has kind of deemed these spots to be pretty loosely or not correlated at all to cheating. So I just want to kind of like follow up with that update, maybe try to push it a little further up the ranks at Stars to try to fast track something like this, because if somebody is being falsely accused, we don't want to get it to a point where anyone who is accused is immediately suspended for 4+ weeks every single time that anything comes into question. So kudos to Stars for having a finger to the pulse and listening to the community, but also, it's important, I think, that when further evidence comes out, that this gets moved up to the top of the pile and he gets his account unlocked.
Yeah.
Seems important. All right, let's we'll try to keep it brief. Let's get your take a little bit on yesterday's show, where we had a pretty lengthy discussion about the notion of hard work being the differentiator between winning and losing.
Yeah. I didn't get a chance to see yesterday's pod, so I should point that out. But we had a conversation about this in our group chat the other day, and I feel like the only thing that I actually disagree on is I think that most people, if they tried, could like beat 1-2 cash. And so I think if you're defining winning at poker as, does a person have the capacity to find some level of stakes where they can make a profit, I think most people have that capacity if they put in a lot of effort, simply because usually at the lowest stakes, you're playing against people who aren't really trying very much. I think once you get into that realm that we were kind of talking about, where you're talking about like an environment where everybody's putting in maximum effort, then yeah, I mean, I definitely agree. In a tough environment, not everybody is going to have the capacity to succeed. But I do think that when you're talking about the scope of people who study poker and why people don't succeed, a lot of the time when people don't succeed, it is because they're underestimating the amount of effort that it takes to get yourself from A to B in terms of I'm losing and now I'm winning at the stakes that I'm choosing to play. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah, I think those points are completely reasonable and relatively valid. The nuance I would add, I guess, I don't even think it's necessarily pushback, but the nuance that I would add is that to me, the issue that I take is in this framework of working harder. Right. Like, we kind of spoke about it yesterday, and I got the formula wrong because I'm a bird brain. But like,
someone should have booked it
when nobody challenged it.
And I'm saying somebody should have.
But when we're talking about the notion of work, like in its technical definition, it's just distance times force, right? Or distance times mass times acceleration.
Yeah.
And that's just a physical thing, right? Like it's easy to put in more effort to that because you can just increase one of the variables, right? You can increase the distance, the force, or the acceleration, or sorry, the mass or the acceleration, right? And by being able to hone in on the variable that you're changing, it's easy to put in more effort.
Yeah.
So the notion of quote unquote working harder is having a clear objective and putting or expelling energy into it. When people say this in mind sports or in, tech or investing or, all these areas that we're exploring in order to accrue more money, I don't know what the fuck it means. Right? So the reason why I didn't accept that there's obviously a low enough stake where anybody can put in a relative degree of effort and show profit, the reason why I had a hard time accepting that is because if they knew what to do, they would be doing it, right? So it's not really a matter of effort. It's a matter of knowledge. And that's why there's a low enough stake that anybody could beat if they acquire a baseline knowledge that allows them to beat it. I think the problem with the messaging is that it implies that people who are playing those stakes and not winning are not trying. And I don't really think that that's true. As a matter of fact, I think that most of them are trying in the wrong ways, either by seeking out people who aren't helpful to them or by just kind of falling victim to all of the other intangibles that will set you up for failure, whether that's emotional tilt, whether that is a mental lapse or a lack of knowledge, whether it's fear-based, whether it's just being too conservative or too risk-on. There are a million ways that they're not going to be calibrated that will ultimately lead to their demise. And then on top of that, for the most part, people just aren't getting in at sample. And I think that by framing it as you just need to put in the work and you need to try harder, especially within the framework of a marketing message, right? Like, let's call a spade a spade. This entire tweet was just simply targeting people who are not winning at small stakes and basically saying like, well, you can't do this on your own, but I can be the motivating factor to get you there.
The ultimate goal is like them thinking, well, I'm not working hard enough, therefore I need to buy more Torelli products.
Exactly.
To win, which of course is totally bullshit.
Yeah. So I think that I keep harping on this because it keeps coming up in marketing messages, and I just have a real problem as somebody who even heavily invests in a life philosophy of like put in the work and grind hard. I don't do things with a lack of effort, and I do think that it's obviously very critical. But the thing is that it's really more about working more efficiently than it is harder.
Oh yeah, I completely agree there. I think that one aspect of it that I didn't really clarify in the discussion we originally had, but that I think is really important is that if you are working in the wrong way, if you're using methods that are not producing results and are not designed in a way that will produce results over the long term, it doesn't even matter how much effort you put in because you're never going to see improvement, right? It's like, I can't think of the right metaphor, like it's the pushing the boulder up a hill or whatever thing. It's like Sisyphus. Yeah. You aren't going to see progress if you're using the wrong methods. And so that's the point where trying harder just doesn't make a difference because you're getting diminishing returns on every little bit of effort instead of working smart and being able to put in a reasonable amount of time and get a lot of return on that if you're using the right methods.
It's like the lie that the multi-level marketing campaigns tell people. This is what they do. Like they go out and they say, here's this product and you need to sell this product and you need to recruit people also to sell this product. And if you work hard enough, you can be a millionaire like me. I've done it. And you just need to put in the effort, put in the work, put in the hard work, and grind and grind and grind, and you'll be a millionaire.
Right.
And it just doesn't work that way. There's just not enough of the pie to go around for everybody. And I think that's kind of similar how, the poker world works, right? There's people at the top who are just making so much money, and they're the ones that are sucking up all the win rate. Where not everybody can win. Obviously, it's a zero-sum game. So I think it correlates that way, and that's kind of why it feels scummy in a way. It feels when you just say just work hard and you can do it, because that's the same thing that the ML.
Yeah. I think when it comes to poker, people, especially from trading products and sites, they kind of want to have something that can last for as long as possible until it becomes outdated. And the idea is you kind of try to copy paste and give it to different clients. And you think that like, this is the answer. This solves your specific problem. But the answer is when it comes to poker, there's not one size fits all, right? Some things and some products are going to resonate with some people and some are not. Some are going to be helpful, some aren't. And the point is you're trying to reach most of the baseline, but trying to say that I have the answer for you specifically is never going to work out the way you want it to.
Yeah, and I think that one thing that I would speak to as a coach as well, having worked with so many different people, is that I think the assumption is for a lot of people that because poker is a mental discipline, that it's simply a matter of information as to whether you succeed or not. So you take in the information about how you're supposed to play, and then you will be able to play that way, as if, you know, there's no like implementation aspect involved. But the reality is that poker works just the same way that any other individual discipline does, be it trying to get good at golf, trying to learn to play the guitar, whatever it is. Like, you have to put in time and energy and repetitions and use good methodologies if you want to go from zero to a certain point. And I think that's the thing that first came to mind for me when I saw this. And so I thought, yeah, people don't work hard enough, but it's only because I've seen so many people who don't really seem to grasp that you're not supposed to be able to study for 6 weeks and go from bad to good. You know, it's not supposed to work that way.
Simple example, even from called pre-Black Friday to now, is our understanding of bankroll management and risk of ruin and variance. Where way back when, 10 buy-ins used to be the staple for what you needed in order to move up to the next stake. And now we laugh at that because we're like, this is utterly ridiculous. But way back when, if somebody made a trading product and said, the reason why you're not getting the higher stakes is because you don't have enough bankroll, here's a product for you to save that. And you say, you listen to the 10 buy-in strategy. It's like, wait a minute, this is ridiculous. So why, when it comes to other trading sites and products now, especially when we have the ability for information to not be gate kept as much, like welcome to the internet and adapting as an environment, that there's different sort of ways and methods that you can learn that are potentially able to help you build a foundation. But if you're looking to somebody that has the answers for your foundation, it's not necessarily rooted in some sort of science or math. It's rooted in, this person told me to do this, they said it's correct, which means it is.
I also just think it overlooks the failure rate, right? Like, the game itself just sorts for a massive amount of failures. So sweeping statements, like, I think anybody would have the capability to beating the smallest stakes if they put in enough effort, completely ignores all of the variables at which people by nature will just fail, right? Like, you could give, if you selected 100 people that are all blank slates and you gave yourself 1 year to teach them how to beat live 1-2,
and you give them all the same amount of money,
and you gave them all the same amount of money, and you give them all the same resources as far as getting better goes, and they all put in comparable effort. Obviously, this is a hypothetical. It's never going to happen.
Right, you can't test subject this.
Right, but like, what I don't think is being given credit for is the ways that people fail. It's not necessarily always going to be a lack of effort, right? There's going to be a lot of people in that 100 that just can't get over the emotional swings. There's going to be a lot of people within that 100 that just can't pull the trigger to jam for pot on river with a bluff. There are going to be a lot of people, you know, there are going to be execution failures. There are going to be tilt failures. There are going to be emotional breakdowns. There's going to be boredom. There are going to be people that like self-select out because the game becomes uninteresting to them when they start to play correctly, right? And I understand that maybe the impetus was that the audience this is geared towards are people that have already passed all those tests. But if you're playing 1-2 or 2-5, it's almost a 0% chance that you've passed all those tests and are still losing, right?
Yeah, I guess in a way, like, that's kind of almost the point I was making, though, in that I think that with time, a lot of that stuff does fade away. Like you mentioned, like, over the span of a year. Yeah, absolutely. I think it would usually take longer than that. But I would argue that over a space of 3 years, 5 years, like, if you gave it enough time, I think the person who doesn't feel comfortable jamming for pot, if you study enough and you get to the point where you understand why it works and you have the conditions that allow you to implement, I think that person can get comfortable. But it sounds like you don't think that's...
No, I do think that,
okay.
But I think that that's only going to be 1 out of 100 people.
Okay.
Right? Like, it's such survivorship bias. Like, of that 100, how many of them are going to make it to year 5? That's the undertones of this tweet that aren't being spoken about, right?
How long are you going to stay in the game?
Literally just saying, like, work harder, get to X, right? But the truth of the matter is like, in the process of getting to X, most of you will fall by the wayside.
I think I'm thinking about it less practically than you are. Like,
Yeah.
I think a lot of what you're saying is obviously really relevant in practice. I think what I'm looking at is like,
If there were a template.
in theory, like if we were able to kind of do it in a vacuum and conduct some kind of experiment, like how long would it take? I think there is the threshold of where someone actually, like, no matter how much time you give them, is incapable of doing it. I think that the number of people is very low.
Good example would be the way the stables work and the filtration process prior.
Right. Like what's the churn month to month, year to year, et cetera, right? And I think that that's a really great example, because anybody who would be willing to take on this endeavor and say like, okay, I'll take 100 random losers and turn them into winners. Well, actually, Nick Howard's already done this.
Yeah.
Right? He'd be a very easy one to source.
He started with a group of 6, but
right.
yes.
And none of them, or maybe like one of them ended up coming out of it, but it helped him build a process, whatever. The whole point is that there's an attrition rate.
You can talk to me about it, yeah.
Yeah. The point is there's a big attrition rate, and that's what's not being spoken about, is that the irony here is the message is actually geared towards the majority of the people who would fall victim to the attrition rate.
Right.
Right.
It's targeting the most likely to fail.
Right. So it's not a matter of, if you're a good coach, then you can get anybody who is in this current plight to break even or winning.
Yeah.
It's, you can get anybody who is in this current plight and is self-selected to have the attributes to get to winning, right?
Yeah, I see what you mean, because it does feel like that's very true. Like, the people who are most likely to listen to Torelli's message he's putting out here are the people who are not as likely to succeed.
Exactly, and I think that was, Landon got a ton of blowback because he honed in on IQ, but that's only one variable, right? And the truth of the matter is, it's easy to poke holes in that, because you can say like, well, the difference in win rate between somebody who has a 120 IQ and a 140 IQ probably is random. Right, there's a certain diminishing return to higher IQ. The same as there would be in height in basketball. The best basketball player in the world isn't 8 foot tall, right? It's just that you have to be tall to be one of the best basketball players.
Right.
So it sorts for these attributes, but being at the extremes doesn't necessarily have an increasing return. But that's going to be true for everything. That's going to be true for risk. That's going to be true for emotional stability. That's going to be true for bankroll, right? Like, if you have an infinite bankroll, but you are risk intolerant or risk averse, it doesn't matter, right? They cancel each other out. You're not going to go play 1 million, 2 million versus Andy Bill. Yeah, in spite of that maybe being the best spot you got.
We make a joke about, at some point we'll have a segment of like rating different poker players that we know in like different categories. And like, it kind of proves the point that there are many different outliers that can succeed, but they are outliers. Right,
because they have high points in one attribute, and then there may be average in other ones that we may hone in on, right? So we are hyper focused on your knowledge of game theory. And so we elevate everybody who's really theoretically sound. They're 10 of 10 in game theory, or they're 9 of 10, like the computer's a 10 of 10, whatever.
Sure.
But maybe they have low attributes in other aspects, be it EQ or emotional stability or tilt or, all these other mitigating factors, bankroll managements, whatever, right? And then there might be other people who are like really fucking good at those things. They're 10 of 10 in bankroll management, in being risk on, like whatever the case may be. But they're only a 7 in theory or a 6 in theory. They can all help elevate, and that's why I think, I'm kind of beating a horse at this point. We can move on, but that's why I have such a problem with these simplified messages. The game is not that simple, and it never will be. It's we have to at some point put some respect on the fact that those people who do make it to the level of survivorship bias really got through the muck. There were a lot of getting beaten down and remaining tenacious throughout it all that allowed them to survive. And that's not even disqualifying the survivorship bias in and of itself. Like, we're all lucky to have been chosen.
I think I'm allowed to say this. But like, we know from people that we're close with that, like, in Ali's stable, Ali went broke backing people.
Yeah.
And it's not because he can't teach, but it's because the conversion process is hard.
Right.
Or in theory, it's like, oh, let me just copy paste myself into a bunch of different people and we're all going to get rich. But clearly that's not what happened.
Right.
Yeah.
And I've seen that. I've been part of a stable where it was me and a bunch of other guys who were good players, but a bunch of people went through a downswing at the same time. The coaches didn't have a lot of time to dedicate to coaching to help everybody get out of it. And in the end, everybody just, like, a bunch of people just stayed in makeup for a while, just like trying to grind their way out. And it got to the point where SCOOP was coming around and the coaches didn't feel like it was worth investing a big chunk more money into trying to recoup their losses from a bunch of guys who were in makeup. So they were just like, we're just going to cut everybody loose. Like, we're just going to end the stable. And it was a stable that theoretically failed, but not because any of the players were lacking in ability or lacking in what it took to succeed. It was because circumstances just conspired to make it such that everybody ran bad at the same time, and it just became like it all fell apart. You know, so there's so much variance there.
Also, even like looking at a stable sense that did work out and does work out very well. Like Pads started and created BitB with his friends, and through their filtration process, they found the people that were young, hungry, and wanted to win enough. Yeah. And then gave them the good system that they had in place to succeed, and they're like one of the biggest stables of all time, with very, very high success rate. And it's not just about call it skill, but it's about the system that you put in place.
Yeah, 100%.
And you're like, the stable filters for the people that don't actually want it, that will not work hard.
Right. That's the underlying part that is not being considered whenever we throw these blanket terms of, well, anybody could do this. It's like, well, what you're really saying is anybody who already possesses the discipline, the tenacity,
floor attributes.
Yeah, exactly. The bare minimum to actually get yourself to that point. And you're disqualifying almost everybody who's reading that message, right? So that was the big thing, is like, he even added the caveat of like, either you're not working hard enough or you're not capable. And what I was really honing in on is the vast majority of the people you're messaging to are already disqualified.
Through the capability standpoint.
Yeah, and you know, capability makes it sound so negative, right?
He flipped it on its head and said, most of you are capable.
Right? Yeah. But it really is ignoring the human aspect of it. Because, like, you're right, if we were in a vacuum here, we could easily show that almost any human being could do it. But that's if we eliminate their human traits. We eliminate the things that allow them to fail to begin with.
Any machine that we can input the correct system in will win.
Machines can do this. Yeah. Every machine that we teach a strategy to will be able to beat 1, 2, and 2, 5.
Yeah, the more you hear it out, the more you realize, like, oh, it's kind of funny, and it's like very based in
live true. Live poker is really fucking profitable because humans play it.
Yeah.
And they play it very slowly, and they play it in a very social setting. Like, when you start to strip those things away, it does become a much more mechanical game where, you know, anybody who's replicating machine strat will do a lot better.
And that's why the people that have the ability to adapt machine strategy as well as like human element do very well.
Exactly. Yeah.
But not everybody's capable of that. And that's okay.
That is okay.
It's just okay. Why do we say that it's not? Like, there's this, it's okay.
Yeah.
Poker's a hard game. It
is hard. All right, moving on today. GTO Wizard introduces a lot of new updates, including a long-awaited node locking. I think you already played with this a little bit, Hunt. You were saying you did a lesson with it earlier today.
Yeah. It's funny. Fausto texted me at like midnight last night. He was like, "They have node locking. They released node locking
until next year, right?"
No, they've been saying for a while that they had it in place. Like, the next stuff is like, they're down the line. It's like multi-way and ICM and stuff like that. But for they've been saying for a while like node locking was coming, and so I got a text from Fausto last night. I took a look at it. This morning I had a session. Shout out to Ricardo from our most recent academy. I had a session where we actually played around with it a little bit, ran a few node lock spots. It's really, really good. It's a streamlined and much simpler and easier to use version of the node locking that used to exist on PO and GTO Plus and things like that. It's very simple to use, very straightforward. You can, from what I can tell, you can use it in conjunction with the trainer and the range builder and things like that, and you can test yourself on building a range to exploit a specific weakness, which is great. Looking forward to using it a lot more because it really seems like it's one of the additions that a lot of people are going to get a lot of value out of.
Yeah, having spoken with Matt a fair amount, they are very conscious of the live poker player also.
Yeah, they're much more so than I think they were to begin with.
Yeah, and a lot of these updates actually kind of dovetail nicely into improving the live player study. So they released some deep stack 9-handed cash sims, preflop specifically. They also released a bunch of what they call research preflop sims. Yeah. So These are basically a lot of different environments where there are multiple different preflop sizings that you can choose from. Now, am I correct in that these are for the database aspect?
What I believe they did, and I'm not 100% on this, is I think these research sims were done with Hold'em Resources Calculator rather than being done with Monka or any other solver that does really detailed preflop stuff.
Right.
And so they don't have post-flop enabled for these sims.
Oh, okay.
But they're in the archive so that you can. They're particularly good for using as your pre-filled ranges to import into Wizard AI. And they have, it basically shows you why or how a given preflop sizing becomes the best sizing in a certain spot. So it, like, if you look at the 200 big blind 3x open, for example, every position will have multiple 3-bet sizes, and it's sort of providing you the evidence that this size is the best 3-bet size, and showing you, do spots exist where 3-bet sizes are being mixed or 4-bet sizes are being mixed or whatever else, right?
Yeah, so I'm looking at this now. You're right.
Yeah.
Most of these spots are all pre-flop solutions.
Yeah.
They do have some new solutions to their database in all spots, though. It looks like they have some new solutions for GG6 Max with multiple pre-flop opening sizes. They have, this is true for in general and simplified. They also have research spots for these. So it looks as though they are continuing to expand the database lookup, which I think is probably a good business decision on their end, but for those who are serious about study, just doesn't fucking matter.
I think what they're going to do, or I haven't spoken to them about this, but what I imagine is they won't really, now that they have the AI, I don't think they'll keep adding to the post-flop library, because it doesn't really make sense to do that instead of just improving the functionality of the AI.
Right.
But the pre-flop library, because they don't have multi-way pre-flop AI sims yet, continuing to add stuff to the pre-flop library is certainly something I think they will do. I know they added a bunch of new MTT stuff today with larger fields, like a 1,000 player field. So the pre-flop, the library is going to be mostly pre-flop, and then the AI stuff is what you use if you want a post-flop sim.
Yeah, I personally hope it goes that way, because I think that it's a much more, it's a better mitigating factor, but I don't necessarily think that that will be the case, because I do think that as far as like onboarding new people to study, the database lookup is just worth a lot.
Yeah.
And it does look like they did add to the database in a few spots. I'm not sure what 6 max cash drops are, but it looks like it's short stack cash games, like 10 big blind or 20 big blind.
I think that's the GG games where they like sometimes randomly drop a certain number of big blinds into
Oh, kind of like bomb pots.
Yeah, I think so. I'm not sure.
Or not bomb pots, splash pots.
Yeah, I'm not sure 100%, but I think
you're correct.
That's what it is.
Yeah, I think you're correct, because it says with limps, no limps at 100 big blinds, so that probably makes a lot of sense. But yeah, it looks like that they are adding these to the full database, including post flop. I imagine that's good. I selfishly want the library to, the post-flop library to kind of cease to exist, because I think that like it's the lowest hanging fruit for people that otherwise are just like not very good or studied. But whatever, like this is the day and age we look at, or we're living in.
It's kind of interesting to me, because I wonder how the chess community would have reacted when the first like Stockfish came out. They thought, oh, is this the end of chess?
Well, was there a lot of money involved in chess back then?
I don't know.
Probably not, right?
I think there's probably more money involved in chess now than there ever has been before.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, like, it's a hit to the pride, I guess.
But, like, for poker, we know that the live, like, how much do you think the live environment is going to change?
We've had a lot of discussions over the last year of people like using Wiz in real time. I mean, think about when we were leading up to the WSOP, how many conversations we had about how are they going to police people using their phone in real time to look up the database, right? And it's getting better. It's continue to get better. They're getting ICM databases now, post-flop solves.
They are, but now tournament stops are aware of it.
Yeah.
Where before they kind of weren't.
Yeah. But I guess the point is, like, if we're getting to a degree where we're concerned about in-game cheating in the live element, it means that for sure people who used to put in no effort and no study are probably practically looking at a lot more spots, which is fine. It's fine. It is what it is.
And in some cases, it might actually be more difficult for people in this regard, where if you look at a chart and then you realize, oh, I'm not supposed to jam this hand, but I would have if I didn't look at the chart and then you have to play post flop, or people that have looked at something like snap shove or like it's kind of wild. Where a couple years ago, I think we had the whole conversation of is snap shove cheating, and now we've moved on to is AI databases in real time considered
It's funny.
cheating?
What I also think is really relevant is that now that these tools exist that can allow you to get even deeper insights and do exploits and node locks and things like that, there's an added benefit to being the person who takes time away from the table to study it. And there's a decreased benefit in being the kind of person who just lazily either uses it to cheat or just studies it in a way where you never look at the node locks, you just look at the baseline sims and things like that. Because the people who are actually taking the time to study using the additional tools that have the ability to go deeper into a sim and look at, what happens if your opponent's making mistakes here or there or whatever, the value that you get from that is really big compared to what you get from just taking a quick glance at an output and trying to implement it. So I think the more tools come out, the more benefit you get from being the person who's able to take the time to actually dig into the nuance.
Yeah. Just to answer a question from chat real quick, Stu Gotts asked if they've adjusted for rake yet. Yes, he says he's a live player who doesn't use it because of that. But no, they put out live sims today, so they have 9-handed deep stack cache, I think up to 300 big blinds with 10% rake capped at 2 big blinds, which is pretty uniform for the live realm.
I think they only have 200 bigs though. I don't think.
I thought I saw 3, but maybe you're right.
I mean, I didn't take a detailed look, so I don't. I guess I wouldn't promise people they have 300.
Yeah, it jumped out at me. So let's see.
I know they have research sims at 300.
Okay,
but
you might be right.
Those are chip EV, and I don't think they have raked 300 big blinds. I think. I'm not 100%.
I think you might be right. I'm looking at it now. It says 9 max cache general, 2 new situations, 10% rake, 2 big blind cap. Stack depths are 150 and 200 big blinds.
Yeah, there we go. So we have deep stacks, so we have 150 and 200, but we don't have 300. And that's fine.
Gentlemen, I have a question for someone who's just starting to get into solvers and how they work. Could you quickly explain, or at least I don't want to say in layman's terms, but I don't know what else to use. What is node locking?
Sure.
And how does it work?
Node locking is basically running a solve, but telling the solver, you have to do this with this hand or with these hands on this board. And you can either lock the entire strategy and force the solver to play a certain specific strategy and then see how the other side of the solver exploits that. Or you can lock specific hands. So you can say, well, I know my opponent is always check raising a set here, so I'm going to lock them into check raising a set, but I don't know anything else, so I'm going to leave everything else unlocked. And I'm going to see what kind of adaptations the solver is making to cater to that. So
and they also added another really cool feature where you can compare the nodes.
Yes.
So you can compare the actual equilibrium node that you initially ran with the node locked.
So does this mean, like, I'll give you a for instance, if I'm raising from the button, I'm playing someone who's a reg, and he's incorporating more 3-bets from the small blind, like with 4, 5 suited and 6, 7 suited, 7, 8 suited, maybe things that maybe the machine isn't doing. Is that something that can be implemented?
Yes. Well, to actually node lock preflop, you would need, they don't have that yet because you would need to use a preflop solver to figure out like what should I be 4-betting. But if you wanted to if you wanted to say, well, my opponent's 3-bet range is wider than what the solver thinks it is, all you would have to do is you would have to just pre-fill a spot, import it into GTO Wizard AI, and then you could edit their pre-flop range to include hands that wouldn't usually be in there, and then run the solve. On top of that, what you could also do is you could say, well, on this particular flop, I think they're c-betting for this size instead of the size the solver wants to use, and I think they are c-betting more often with these hands, or they're checking with exactly this kind of a range, and you can lock that in and see what the solver is telling you to do in response to that. So for example, this morning I locked a spot where, it's a very dynamic flop, like 9, 8, 6, 2 spades, and they're never checking back a set or 2 pair, right? I just locked that. Immediately I was able to run that spot, see what happens on a blank turn if they're never checking back a set or 2 pair. And I get a response for how my strategy looks on the turn if they're playing well versus if they're never slow playing anything.
So am I correct in saying that node locking helps you exploit weaknesses in your opponents?
That's exactly it. That's the whole point of it. Yeah, absolutely.
Right. Like I was speaking with Berkey the other day, like in the player pool that I play against, I see that like on monotone boards, right? Usually it's gonna be a small bet, right?
In theory,
right? But it's always a big bet that comes
Right.
in, right? So so then you just lock it for a big bet.
Yeah.
And then you see what your response is to that.
Well, previously you could lock it and you could force them to use a certain size. But what it would do is it would use the optimal range for that size.
Right.
So it would say, I'm only able to use this size, but I'm still going to bet with a well-rounded range. Now, what you can do is you can say, well, they're only using a big size and they're only betting with value and the ace of the suit.
Right. Okay.
And what happens now if that's their exact betting range?
Right. Or the whole opposite extreme of like they're range betting for pot.
Right.
Right.
That type of thing.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, if that was happening. Like all sorts of extreme, absurd things you can test out. And you can also do it through multiple streets.
This is like you said, they're looking at the live players. This is so good for live because
it's
this
very
is what
powerful.
happens all the time in live, right? You just see wild shit,
Right.
and you're able to just now node lock those in and see what your response should
And the
be.
way the AI interface is it's everything is just a click.
Yeah.
Right. So the big thing, like one of the big reasons why I hated using PO and I never put a lot of time and effort into it is because the UX UI was awful.
Yeah, this is so much better.
Node locking was so tedious and took so much time, and learning how to subtree was so frustrating. Everything was just time consuming, right? Like to get one output, I would spend 30 minutes to an hour depending on, and then if you start to run deeper SPR spots, you might be looking at like days.
Yeah.
Right now it's just literally your fingertips, and you can, what I enjoy about it is you can play. You just play around with so many different scenarios until you land on something where you're like, okay, this actually replicates what I think I see in the wild. Because we never know. We never have pure vision over what's actually happening. But we start to see enough showdowns where we build a bit of an intuition. And we say like, okay, I have a pretty high degree of confidence of like, this is what's happening, but I have no way of testing it.
Right.
So I don't really know what to get out of this. Now there's a way.
Pyro proficient people are molding right now.
I know.
Yeah.
But you guys put a lot. Oh, you're saying because this is out.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it took a lot of energy to get proficient at
They're
PO.
removing the gatekeep.
One really cool thing that you can do that I did this morning is look at, let's say, a river spot where you've already locked the flop and the turn, so they get to the river with a bunch of bluff catchers and maybe a few strong hands. And obviously, at a certain point on the river, if they're folding beyond a certain frequency, you're now bluffing with every possible bluff because they're overfolding, right? And if you get to a certain spot and you say, well, I know they're calling the river with these hands, what you can do is you can lock it at, okay, 100% call with these hands. And then you can use the slider to take the rest of the range, the hands that are like break-even bluff catchers, and you can just keep running it and to see at what point of confidence do you need to have in how often they're going to fold their bluff catchers before you now need to stop bluffing, right? So like, what I did was I had a spot where they're calling all their 2 pairs and sets on the river, and with their 1 pair, I was like moving it around, and it was like, okay, if as soon as I get to where I'm like 50-50 that they might bluff catch me with 1 pair here, now it means they're actually over calling, which means I just stop bluffing. But if I'm like 90% sure they're not going to call with 1 pair, I just bluff everything. So it's really, really good to just use the sliders and try to figure out your bluffing frequencies based on your confidence level, stuff like that. There's tons of cool stuff you can do.
Not like in the not necessarily a counter, more as a common response to node locking as a whole. Because when node locking X amount of years ago kind of became more prevalent in some form of study, you kind of realize that basically when one person is defensive somewhere, you are offensive somewhere else, and inverse. So it's not at this point necessarily the difference of that changing, but how easy it is to look at and understand.
It's the precision now.
Yeah.
Like you can actually lock into some level of precision where you don't leave yourself open to a huge counter exploit. Or an obvious counter exploit, right? The huge counter exploits will always, if you're extreme in your exploit, there will obviously be an extreme counter. But
I think the important part in the sense of the extreme is the machine is so fragile. Any small deviation by X%, like you might think 5% check back or 5% bet isn't that much, but in solve it's very extreme.
Yeah. It's kind of the nature of chaos, right? Like small change can yield anything from a small to a very large.
And that's poker as a whole, though. You're just gambling that you have an idea of their mistakes better than they do.
Yeah.
You're saying, oh, like they're too weak here, I'm going to bluff range, and I'm just going to trust that it's going to be good. Yeah. And then like having the mental capacities to say, even if it doesn't work, my read is still probably correct. And that's the hard part.
It's tough to juggle.
Yeah, you
It's
gotta
definitely
work harder.
tough to juggle. Okay, we did do a little bit of work while we were at Big Bear.
How hard did we work?
We spent some time looking at. It's funny. I wanted to use the trainer to like go over a few dozen spots, and we ended up spending 2 hours on one, which was pretty remarkable.
It really was like an office level segment.
Yeah.
Of you and I looking at each other, and then everyone like having chime in.
Yeah, it was fun.
Like fire drill.
We're not actually going to go over that spot, but what the conversation turned to from the spot that we looked at is, how do you play turns as the aggressor when draws complete? So, in other words, like when you're taking aggressive lines and then the draw fills, of course you're going to have a portion of your range that improve upon that draw filling. That's not really the question at hand. It's how do you play everything else? When you bet ace jack on jack deuce 3, 2 spades, and the turn's a spade, how do we go about this situation, right? Like what types of hands now become too weak to follow through on? How worried of the flush card do we need to be? How worried of the open-ender hitting do we need to be? That type of stuff. And the answer isn't incredibly simple. It's not as simple as saying like, well, don't be worried at all or be overly concerned.
Well, herein lies the issue with saying that you have the answer for many spots.
Right.
Yeah.
Right? There's so much nuance and complexity where
The answer is always just, it depends.
it is. Like it really is. And to many, that's a very like reductive / annoying answer, but it's just true.
Right.
So it just depends on the combos in range for opponent, combos in range for you. And these things are going to change on different straight and flush completing cards.
Right. The hard part really is, if the answer in every spot is it depends, the hard part is knowing what it depends on.
Right.
It's like knowing what size I bet this turn with, like what does that depend on? What variables are going to influence that? Because that's really what's going to lead you to an answer. It's not necessarily going to be a question of what preference do I have, like what size feels good in this spot. It's going to be, it depends on something, and what variables am I looking at to find that answer?
I think that's where we could start to break it down to a baseline heuristic, is that whether or not we bet will be hyper dependent upon the equity our hand possesses, the blockers our hand possesses, a myriad of things. Like, can our hand improve? Is our hand static to its equity that's only going to get worse, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? A million different considerations at the hand level. Mm-hmm. However, what we will recognize is that we will have bets, right? So this is where I think the heuristic comes from. When the draw completes, what general size will we be utilizing when we do choose to bet? Because once you flesh out the size, then you can start to fill the bucket with hands that feel comfortable at that size. Mm-hmm. And when you arrive at the point where you're like, I think my hand wants to bet, but it really doesn't feel comfortable for that size, then you're probably somewhere around the indifference point.
Yeah.
Like when you have ace jack no spade on jack 3 deuce 10 of spades, it's like, okay, well, kind of want to bet, feel like I have a pretty strong hand, but also like, I don't really want to bet 75% pot, that kind of thing. So like maybe this is the point of indifference. Maybe it's not ace jack, maybe it's queen jack. You know what I mean? Like somewhere there's a point where internally you're like, this doesn't feel all that great to me any longer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that's kind of how solve buckets in some regards, where that's where the mix comes in. Mm-hmm. And then we're trying to get to the base level standpoint of saying, okay, let's just bet these and then check this part of the mix, And it's also predicated on whether or not you even bet the flop in the first place.
Right.
Because now you have to say, okay, did they fold these gutters that came in with this certain card? Or did they fold these hands, or did they not even get the chance to fold because I checked? So there's a lot of different reasons when a turn completes a draw or completes like a flush. It's like, well, how much of their range connected with this card, and did I bucket them into a narrower range through a bet?
Right.
Because once you bet, they're allowed to have folds.
Yeah, the easiest differentiator here, I think, is when you can hone in on any specific terminology that you can use to help simplify the equation. So I think the most prevalent one, or the best one, is how capped your opponent's range is, right? If you can look at a spot and ask yourself, how capped are they here? If the answer is not capped at all, the answer is they're completely uncapped because, for example, the flush completed the turn and they have a lot of flushes in their range. It's immediately going to be a cue that you cannot easily justify just taking a really big bet, overbet kind of a strategy. If they are capped, if the turn's a brick and the draws didn't get there at all, now they're probably more likely to just be mostly possessing one pair, and that's immediately a cue that you get to polarize a lot more. But if you can answer that question, you can immediately start to get a sense of how much offense am I going to be playing here? How easy is it going to be for me to polarize? Because whether or not your opponent can have any kind of nut hands in range is a really big factor in influencing what they're actually going to be doing against your bet.
Right.
Yeah, so we do have a spot to look at here. I pulled up the GTO Wizard Trainer, set Guapo up, and it's going to be an easy one in some regards, but not so easy in others. So, we'll just run through it. I know a flush card comes on the turn, but, we don't know that in theory whenever we're...
That's a sick SPR. What are we, SPR of 60?
Yeah, so we're looking at...
SPR of 62 and a
We're
half.
looking at a single raise pot for roughly 400 big blinds effective. So the way that you manipulate this in the AI is you can't do more than 250 big blinds, right?
Yeah.
But the way to manipulate this is to just create an SPR that is similar to deeper stack. So if you're 400 effective in a single raise pot, there's going to be roughly 7 blinds in the middle whenever you arrive at the flop. So, basically you can just set up something comparable to that at 250 big blinds. So we're somewhere in that neighborhood. We're about 400 effective single raise pot. We see a 10, 3, 2 spade board. We flop the nuts. And these are the options that we have available to us. We can go check, quarter pot, or 2/3. I set this up to optimal sizing, so we're never really going to use a larger size than this. That should be abundantly clear anyway on a relatively dry.
Really? Does it not want to use? Because I would have thought our overpairs would want to go big here.
I think the issue is SPR probably.
Yeah.
Oh yeah,
for sure.
We're probably just like so absurdly deep that like, overpairs are like not.
Right.
They don't want to start
not
piling
happy-
money
right,
in,
like,
right.
Can't really
Yeah.
start the 3 whenever
right.
3 is
Right,
like
right, like-
300%.
At like 100 bigs, this would be like a really good big bet board, but
Yeah.
it just doesn't seem that way here at this depth.
We run it for 2E and 3E. I think 2E at this, I think 3E at this depth was 200% pot, and 2E was 500% pot.
just the
So
20 bigs into a pot
Yeah.
of 4.
yeah,
Like,
it's just
love it.
not a fan
Yeah,
of
go
that.
for it.
Quick disclaimer: E just means equal sizes. So if you go
Yes.
3E, 3 equal
you.
sizes, 2E, 2 equal sizes.
Yeah,
Yes.
thank you. So yeah, especially versus a big blind range that's going to be pretty wide here. I think that we want to turn this into a 3-street game more often than not. I think this is a pretty clear quarter pot spot.
Yep.
We're probably going to be range betting this board. Can't imagine we're going to make any errors with top set. You would, I assume, probably have, if you want to play a 2-sizing strat, you would have the larger size here with a good chunk of your range, your overpair type
Ace
hands.
10 overpair.
Yeah, your
Ace
strong
4, Ace
10s,
5.
your gut shots, et cetera, et cetera. But if you want to simplify this to a single bet, I imagine it would just reduce down to quarter pot.
Yeah, I would imagine that you would just quarter pot range instead
Mm-hmm.
of 75 range.
All right, get us to the turn, Guap.
Did he check raise us?
I don't know. Let's see.
Oh.
Attack.
It'd be fun. No.
Nope, he called.
Okay. Now
It
what?
all gets there.
Now
I was looking
what?
for the polar raise. like
It
that.
was,
Yeah.
it was looking for it.
Well, that's the worst card in the deck. What do I do now?
So the ace of spades comes off on the turn.
What do you do, Brian?
The SPR is still incredibly deep.
We'll find out.
And this clearly poses a bit of a problem for some of our hands, right?
Mhm.
Now we have a set, so this isn't going to be super sticky. But the question really does arrive at what do we do with our range whenever we arrive at these certain turn cards? And like I said, I think the answer that we ultimately want to come to is, well, we are going to have bets, and we can fill the bucket up with hands that want to bet here as we see necessary. But the real question is, what sizings are we going to be choosing whenever we do choose to bet? Now, the ace of spades is very particular because it's not just a flush completing card. It's also an over
5-4.
and it completes a straight, right? So what we really have to ask ourselves is what types of hands will our opponent be incentivized to continue when we choose to bet? And will that change whether we bet small, medium, or large? The answer is obviously always going to be yes to the will that change based off of our sizing, right? So I think whenever we are choosing to follow through with a bet here on the turn, we want to have one pair of hands that we can get value from, like our ace X, right? We also want to have a lot of our 2-pair hands, like ace 10, ace 3, ace 2, that we may have in range. These are going to be layup bets.
our sets are going to be layup bets. And all we're talking about is if we look at the equity distribution, we're looking at the higher equity hands. Flushes are obviously always going to bet. I can't imagine any flushes really going to check back. And 4-5 is going to want to bet. So this is going to round out our value. We're going to have plenty of bluffs. We're going to have a lot of Broadway hands that have a single spade. This is a hijack opening single raise pot, right? So we're going to have a lot of king, queen off, king, jack off, queen, jack off, these types of hands that are gut shot flush draws. These are going to be our natural bluffs, right? So it's easy for us to fill the bet bucket. Why then are we choosing this 40% pot instead of just like blasting? Why aren't we going like pot or pot and a quarter, pot and a half? We have really strong hands in this range.
Yeah.
UFC.
Yeah, I mean, it's partly that. It's partly the fact that we're betting into a range that contains flushes. But it's also, when you think about the very top portion of our range, part of the problem on flush boards is that when we have a flush, it's now harder for us to get value. Because when we have something like king, jack of spades here, stuff like king 10 with the king of spades or or jack 10 with the jack of spades doesn't exist in villain's range. So when we have two spades in our hand, villain is inherently more likely to have a hand without a spade. And when that happens and we bet big, they have a lot of hands that just have easy folds. Yep. So we end up wanting to actually size down in a lot of these spots, not just with the sets and stuff that are scared of the flushes, but actually with the flushes as well, because we just don't get a lot of value if we bomb it with king, jack of spades here, since they just have too many non-spade hands that can't continue.
Are you trying to make their, like the middling portion of their range indifferent?
We're trying to make like a 10 without a spade indifferent. We're trying to bet a size that they have some incentive to call there.
Where if you bet too small, then they
just have a trivial
easy call decisions. If you bet too big, they have easy fold decisions.
Like if you pot it here, like 10-9 of hearts or whatever, just gets to fold.
Yeah, sick bonus. No, you're good. Like sick bonus, by the way, when you choose the B40, you also get to gain information of their range, as if they do have a 2-card hand as well. Like if you flush or flush them, they're going to put in raises a lot of the time for you. So they're going to do the hard work where you can kind of do this bet as a probe and then figure out what to do on river in some spots where if they had a flush, they would have found a check raise on the turn. Right.
And that's the other thing about these flush draw boards, that flush over flush is almost always just going to get all in anyway. Like you're not really going to have to like try super hard to get your opponent to put in money with a worse flush here, because in a heads up pot, the likelihood of flush over flush is low enough that it's not like they're going to somehow find a fold with a 7 high flush or something. So you're not really trying to aggressively put a ton of money in to get them to bluff catch that hand. You're just expecting that they're going to raise it anyway, and you just can bet small as a result.
I think Brian pointed out something that is a great heuristic for people to anchor to that maybe they don't think about enough. Every bet you make comes with a point of indifference. And very often, rather than thinking, why am I betting this hand? Is it for value protection, et cetera, et cetera? What's more important is thinking to yourself, what portion of my opponent's range do I make indifferent with this size, right? Because if we go full pot, we start to make almost all 1-pair hands very uncomfortable if they don't have a spade, right? And that's not necessarily going to be a good thing when we think about the stronger portions of our range, our sets, our straights, our flushes, our 2-pairs. That's going to be the bulk of our value betting range. Right. So going too large here helps our bluffs, sure, but we don't really care to ever build a strategy around helping our bluffs.
Yeah. People think like, oh, well, I want them to fold this hand. Like I want to win the pot. You know, people are like, they're thinking about indifference in terms of, you know, what gives my opponent an uncomfortable decision? Well, you know, oh, if my opponent has 10-9 of hearts and I bet big here, well, that's an uncomfortable decision. Like, no, it's not. Like if you just bomb it here and they have a 10 with no spade, it's a really comfortable fold. You know, it's not indifferent. It's not that you know, they're uncomfortable because they have to fold. They actually had a really easy fold.
Yeah, most of the money, if not all of it, in regards of where you're going to win the most money in poker is through the middle.
Right.
You know, if you make the middle really annoyed, you're going to allow more mistakes to happen.
Yeah, and I always come back to just thinking of it in terms of give them tough spots. Put them in a spot where when they have a 10, they don't know if they're supposed to call or not. They're like reluctantly calling or like reluctantly folding. Don't put them in a spot where you bomb and they just have an easy fold.
Yeah, people make these, I feel like they make this mistake all the time where they're so concerned about just winning the pot right there that they just give up massive amounts of EV because of it.
Yeah, and in most cases that comes down to that manifests itself in betting big in spots where you actually should bet smaller, or betting flops in spots where you actually should check the flop and force them to play the next street, or like, you know, a lot of the, actually some aspect of it is it'll be going all in on the flop in a spot where it's much more profitable to play the next street. So like you bet, they raise, and you just like ship the flop with a set because you're just hoping they call off, right? But instead, you actually should just call and force their bluffs to continue and get more value that way, right? So like there's a lot of spots where that happens.
Most of the win rate in the tough spot situation is very dependent on like action, capped, uncapped, and turn distribution, right? Where on this specific turn, ace of spades, you go B40, but if the turn was an offsuit ace, that's a different strategy.
Or if the turn's like a 7 of clubs, then it's like, okay, brick, we're bombing. You know, we're betting really big there.
Right. And there's a difference between how you adjust and find the nuance versus just saying, oh, this turn comes, you do this.
Yeah, I also think the ace is a particular magical card. Well, the ace of spades is a particular magical card because it is an over and completes a straight. I think if it's like the 9 of spades instead, we may see something like B66 here or B75 instead of 40%. And that little bit of nuance isn't that particular, right? If you just always chose 40% pot here when the flush card fills, you're still going to do fine because you're going to build your range correctly. What I think becomes a little bit more important to identify is, and this is maybe where our audience can kind of relate and chime in a little bit. What are you leaning into building your checking range out of? Because my instinct is that they're probably checking too many good hands.
On this turn?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think that people are generally way too reluctant to bet hands without a spade here. And I think that they don't want to bet them because they don't want to have to fold them. But in fact, there are a lot of hands here which can value bet and then just auto fold to a raise because they just don't have enough equity versus the actual raising range. So
it feels like the natural thing to do is just like check back a 10 without a spade.
Yeah.
Well, that's actually probably pretty good.
That's probably fine. But like if you have like ace 8 of clubs here, it's completely fine to just bet and get value from like 10-9 with a spade.
Right.
But then if you do get check raise, you just like annoyingly fold.
Yeah. So you're saying
you have
that,
like a weak ace.
You're saying that people will check back when they hit the ace too often.
Right. They'll check back because they don't want to get raised. When in fact, betting to get value and then folding when you get raised is fine, especially if you know your opponent's just not bluffing enough when they raise.
So it's like, oh, I see bet this flop with like ace jack, no spade, and now I hit my ace, and now they check to me like, well, now I just want to get the showdown.
Yeah.
Kind of thing where you're just leaving a lot of value on the table.
But exactly. In reality, you can get at least one more street of value here. Possibly if the river comes as 7 of clubs and you have ace jack of diamonds, maybe you can even get a 3rd street sometimes. You know? Like, it does happen.
I think a lot of hands that really mess up here are like jacks through kings.
Right.
And not recognizing that you could still bet these pretty comfortably for value. And that ironically, you probably are happier to bet without a spade than with.
Yeah.
Because you have very easy decisions. If you get raised, it's a very comfortable fold. If you don't get raised, it's a very comfortable check down.
Right? There's very few aces in your opponent's range as well at this point.
There's a few, but
there's a few wheel draws and stuff like that, right?
But even like ace 3 is going to have a tough time raising.
Yeah, they don't really raise with.
No, they're not going to raise.
Right. So like with jacks, part of the hardest thing about if you have jacks with a spade here is when you do get raised, like you're now blocking the jack of spades. So yeah, you're blocking some flushes, but you're also blocking a lot of bluffs. So when you do get raised, like maybe you're up against some straights sometimes, you're definitely in a weird spot with a bluff catcher like that. Whereas with jacks with no spade, you're getting value when you get check called, and you're just going to clearly check back the river. But if you get raised, it's an obvious fold, the trivial fold.
Right.
Yeah, and I think that's really important to recognize because you obviously want to have like some king of spade check back, queen of spade check back, jack of spade back. It's better to do it with the pair, which actually has showdown value. Whereas I think our audience, I don't want to speak for the audience, but I think there are people out there watching that may have a hand like king, queen, king of spades and say like, oh, I don't want to get check raised.
Yeah.
So I'm going to realize my equity.
Actually, you're fine getting check raised with that hand because you're just never folding.
Exactly. That's the happy bet call. And if they check to me on the river, fuck them. I'm going for a type of hand,
exactly.
You know? But what you don't want is to have 2 black kings face that exact same check raise, have to peel, and then never be good whenever you're facing a bet on the river, but you can't really know.
Yeah, and then you're like, well, should I turn kings into a bluff? Like, what am I doing here? You know. But you check the turn, you're just like calling most rivers. You know, it's just a nice easy spot.
Yeah. I think that these are the very important things to understand. Shout out to Jersey Joe hitting us with the super chat. He said, props and thanks to Hunt as always. Much respect. I love Wednesdays. I think that, you know, with tens here, it's pretty trivial. We're obviously going to be betting, but I think building out that check back range is so critical because you really want to kind of bucket it to mirror the types of hands that you want to bet, right? We know we're not going to check back flushes, at least not many. We might check back like 5-4 of spades, you know, like even that, like, I don't really think so. But in order to protect that check back range, we want to be able to have hands that can improve similar to the hands that we're betting already that are nutted, right? Yeah. So you do want to have some king of spades, queen of spades, jack of spades, and middling spades too, right? Like you're going to see bet eights on the flop. You're very happy to check back eights with a spade on the turn.
Yeah,
right?
and I'm even for what it's worth with tens on turn, I wouldn't even be surprised if you play some amount of check.
You definitely do, but in practice, you know.
Sure, and like the point being
But
is
you're saying with set of tens.
I would always like bet deuces and threes, and I wouldn't bet tens as often because we're targeting a 10.
Right.
In most cases. So if we have the cards we're targeting, it's probably more likely we want to check.
You want them to have 10 with a spade.
As we do.
But having pocket tens is kind of the same as having an ace, right? Like you free up the 10, but like when we have tens, we can target the ace. They have a lot of ace high peels. Yeah. Or they have enough.
Sure.
You would assume.
It's just a matter of we still want to protect ourselves on board pair rivers and have boats in that line as well. So if I were to pick a combo to check between tens, deuces, and threes, I would pick tens because when we do have deuces, and like if we have on flop facing for the quarter pot, they're going to check raise us a lot with the other sets.
Sure. Yeah, I think that's true.
If I'm going to choose between, okay, I need to protect, I would start with tens, and then I would go aces, and then I would go deuces and threes.
Yeah, I mean, we could choose the bet 40 here option. I imagine it's probably going to be like 85% bet, 15% check, something like that. That's really not that important. Again, like if you're always betting these hands, not that big of a deal. Okay, 80%. So yeah, 80%, not that bad.
We're good.
Nailed it.
We've come a long way from like 5 years ago when everyone thought you sucked at poker, huh?
I mean, I just kept it under wraps, bro. But we can talk about this river spot too, because even though the majority of the strat chat was about building turn ranges and stuff like that, this river is actually interesting enough where I think that we can discuss it. Because it further amplifies what happens when the draw completes. Because technically now another draw completed, right? So more hands beat pocket tens at this point. However, when you look at it from a range vantage point, the 4 doesn't really change anything, right? It weakens our worst value bets on the turn, but like now they're pretty happy to check down. If you have a hand like ace 3, ace 2, you're not going to be betting here again thin for value. And you do get some more thin value bets whenever you bet a hand like pocket 5s with a spade, right? Or something of that sort. Maybe 5-6. I guess you don't have 5-6 off, so you would have just had a flush anyway. It doesn't matter. Stand corrected. But
we can bet 5-6 on the turn with no suit.
Yeah, I think we should.
That's
fair.
Like you have some bluffs on 4 flushes.
Yeah, those are reasonable bluffs, right?
Yeah, I imagine so.
And then also just like our 4-5 that was a clear turn value bet, right? We still just have it, right? So now we're talking about this one-liner falling on the river. And the discussion shifts to how thinly can we go for value, and then what sizings, right? Well, we have to start with sizings first before we start to fill the bucket. And you can see here that we just always add all in as an option, but it's never going to get chosen.
Just in case
right?
you don't like that 22x pot.
Bro, I fucking love 22x pot. Don't get me started.
You don't want to have a range of king of spades like jack and then king 6.
Don't get me started, okay? I will find the 22x pot jam in a bomb pot at some point in the next few months. I promise you that.
Got to pull out.
However,
the 2000%.
in theory, we're not going to choose that option. So you can see that the solver is zoning in on one size. It's going to go for the full pot size here, and there's a particular reason for that, right? Based off of the texture of the board, where a lot of flushes and straights are available, one pair of hands aren't going to be going for value any longer, right? So it does become a little bit more polarized in nature, especially now that we've arrived at the river. There's no more equity to be distributed. You're pretty much fixed to your hand is ranking here, and now you just have to decide whether or not it's a bet. So the question I have for you guys is, how do you make that distinction between what is too thin to value bet and what's not? And then secondarily, where or what attribute are you leaning on to pull from your bluffs?
I think it starts with what region am I targeting, right? I think if you decide that you're targeting, let's say, maybe the two pairs here.
So what do I want to make indifferent?
Yeah, right. And I think whatever you want to make indifferent, you start value betting the stuff that's slightly stronger than that.
Mm-hmm.
So let's say you decide that your threshold is the two pairs here, you're value betting all your sets plus.
Mm-hmm.
If you decide that your threshold is the ace with a spade, let's say, then you might be able to thin value bet some two pairs, but you really don't have a lot of two pairs here. So it's just
at least not ones that don't block what you're targeting.
Yeah, exactly. So like you don't want to bet with stuff that blocks what you're targeting, but if you decide that the two pairs are your threshold, like you want to make ace 4, ace deuce, ace 3 indifferent, then you basically say the stuff above that category that doesn't block it, like the sets, that's going to be my category for value bets. And then my bluffs are going to be stuff that also doesn't block it. So you don't want to bluff with like something that has an ace. We don't like to randomly turn an ace into a bluff for some reason.
It's kind of on river a spot where we need to be very particular about what we're betting and the threshold of hands that we're betting. So like we're not really betting very much one pair anymore. We're very scared.
I would say none.
Right. We're very scared. So now when we're betting, we're trying to represent that we have either like a 3-card, call it set, some 2-pair sure, and then a 5-card hand.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So now our range is so strong that we are deciding to reopen action with, because we do have the ability to check back and realize we are trying to say that we have a very good hand. And half pot doesn't really say very good hand in this instance.
Right. So I think that's very important. Along those lines, if we restricted our betting range to only straights or better, do you think the sizing would increase?
I think it would have to, but only slightly.
Yeah.
Because I think that
Like 125.
Like 150.
Yeah, I think we would slightly increase it, but we would still. The bottom line is if there's still a portion of our value bets that has to worry about running into a flush and getting raised.
Right.
So
so that's the game I was trying to play.
Right.
If then we restricted it to flushes only, do you think the sizing would continue to increase?
I think it would. I think it would get bigger, but I think that there would be a certain point where we now. I guess it would be tricky because we're talking about things in the inverse, right? Because like, if we increase the sizing, the value bet range is going to change. But normally we're not deciding on the value betting range before we pick the sizing. So
Agreed.
I think in theory, if we said we're only betting flushes or better, I think the sizing would go up, but it's hard to know at what point we're like no longer really getting a lot of value, and instead we want to at least have some possibility that we get raised and things like that, right?
Well,
like,
yeah,
so
I'm not suggesting it's something we practically do. I'm trying to.
No, I just mean like in the solver, like once you get to like 300, 400%, like now we're gonna get to a point where like not even all the flushes can actually get value from that.
Agreed.
Right?
That was
like,
going to be my next question, right? So that's just the game that I'm trying to play in order to build out this heuristic. Like if we then reduced it to we're only betting a jack high flush or better, and then only a queen high flush or better, or a king high flush or better. The point that I'm trying to make is that the tighter the range becomes and the more polarized it becomes, the larger the sizing that will generally be allocated to it, right?
Yeah.
So the big reason why full pot is being utilized here is because we're saying we have a very strong hand, like Landon was saying, of let's call it set or better. But it is including a bunch of hands that are still losing to hands that our opponent would check, like straights and flushes.
Yeah.
Right? So that we're basically capped at pot here whenever we want to select our sizing, if we want to be value betting this wide. And it's important to recognize that, because what's happening in the wild is that people are value betting way too tight here for the size that should be encompassing a lot more hands.
Yeah, they're betting like 4 bigs here with like a straight.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And that's where the live pitfall comes from.
Something that I think is important as well, and I don't know if you can play with this sim specifically in Node Locket, but there's a very high, like there's a decent percent chance that out of position has leads on the end.
Yeah.
Where they're going to be more concentrated to 5x.
Sure. Yeah.
Right. So the more that they, in theory, will lead their 5x when they check, the more they don't have it.
Yeah.
Which means you can value bet thinner.
Yeah.
In practice, if nobody leads a 5, you need to be a lot more careful about the hands you're choosing to bet because of the action that you're going to receive when you face a call.
Yeah, that's a really good way to use solvers. In fact, even before the node locking came out on Wizard AI, you could do this. You can run a spot where the out of position player is supposed to have leads, and then see what happens when you remove their ability to lead, and see how it's going to influence the in-position player's strategy, because there's big changes that happen there. And it's very relevant to real game play because there's so many spots where people are supposed to have out-of-position donk bets or leads, and they don't in practice.
Right. So I think that the big takeaway here that we need to understand is that when we want to bet a wider array of equity for value, then we need to pick a size that matches that. The tighter that we get, the more that we need to increase our size in order to match that. Where I was going with the pitfall on live is that your opponents are choosing disincentivized sizings for how tight their range is. And this is a very dangerous pitfall for you as a player in that field to fall into, because what ends up happening is then you stop calling enough, right? And this is really critical. It's okay if you recognize that you're against an opponent who never bets worse than a straight here for value, but they're only half potting. It's okay to still call your sets, right? Now, you don't want to always do it, because then you're the fish for just, calling with an inferior hand 100% of the time when it's pretty clear they're not bluffing. Mm-hmm. But if they're bluffing at all, you're printing. Yeah. You're just printing because they're choosing a disincentivized size. And I get a lot of flack for this. I get made fun of a ton in the Bellagio game that, like, I just always call. I always call. And, like, what they don't...
Quit betting third pot on the river.
Right. Like, what they don't understand is that they're choosing a pot. Like, they're betting pot on the end in a situation where their value bet range should probably only be flushes or better. Mm-hmm. And I'm just, like, holding a set, and it's like, thank you. Like, thank you so much for choosing a size that's so disincentivized here that I can now call. And when they tap the table and go, you got it, you always fucking call. It's like, well, yeah, because you actually picked a size where I only need you to bluff sometimes.
Right.
Yeah, this is kind of a big deal when it comes to getting over the negative feedback loop that is poker, where sometimes when you have bluff catchers and you realize that your hand is indifferent for, call it pot and a half, but they go pot, you're actually the one making money.
Right.
Where it's very easy to look at that hand, be like, oh man, I never win here, call and then lose and think I'm the idiot, versus I actually got a good price here and I'm okay to lose because the game allows for this to be the case.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. That's the biggest thing that I want everybody to key in on, right? Like, think of how many times on the end some whale, like, joke bet one big blind and you're holding ace high. But you know that he has a hand that he's not folding. So you can't bluff him, right?
Right.
And you flick in the big blind and just say, like, I got to pay to see it type of thing. Like, yeah, you're probably not making money there, right? But you might be if ever he's fucking around, right? Like, all it takes is, like, 1% of him to be fucking around,
right? And
you're just absolutely printing. That's the extreme example, right? And the reason I use it is because we've all been in that spot where we dusted a big blind just for information's sake, and it's worth it. It's worth every fucking penny. Well, when you start to extrapolate that out to disincentivized sizings, where people are choosing too small of a size with too tight of a range, we now have options that are all very profitable to us.
Yeah, when you see certain sizes, or at least when you get to a point of understanding what the theoretical size should be, you can effectively start making diagnostics as to how your opponent plays. Right. And through one hand, you can get thousands of information, like thousands of hands of information.
Correct.
You realize, oh, okay, like they're betting half pot in a spot, they go pot and a half. Okay, that this half pot size is going to be too likely to have value in it. I can start potentially bluff catching less.
Right, and maybe bluffing more if you can figure out what the bottom of their value range is, right? If it's hands where they're just like, oh, I'm going to bet half pot with this because he never raises me, and if he does, it's like a clear, easy fold. Right, and now they start making huge errors where they're like betting a straight on the end here on this one-liner for half pot instead of like pot plus, and then you just raise pocket sixes with a spade, and then they just start like pure folding a five.
I think this is a difference between looking at the tree and looking at the forest, where you look at the tree and you say, well, damn, I lose here, versus, okay, what can I gain from this?
Right.
And most of the time when you see a size that isn't actually correct and you have that information of what is the correct size, you can actually start to take much more advantage than you really think.
Correct.
Because of the inverse relationship of poker, where if something happens, other things don't happen.
Right. I think that's a really good point. And yeah, I don't think we need to go much deeper into the river spot. I just wanted that to be a general takeaway.
Time to pot it and get raised.
Yeah, you can pull it up, Bob. I think this is a pretty clear value bet for us.
Kind of scared of. I mean, if you could play with the node lock, I don't know if you can do it in real time, but I wonder how the difference between potting and then clicking study and then checking it versus like how much you actually bet. See, look, you check back a third of the time.
Yeah. I mean,
what did it call with?
I hope it has a 5.
Difference.
Up ace jack scam.
Got him.
It's a pretty thin value or a pretty thin bluff catch. But it's a good one,
It
right?
trusts
He's
us.
calling with an ace, no diamond. What is going on
with
here?
that?
What, you got a little surprise for us? What was that?
Don't worry about it.
I'm using the countdown music from our last pod.
Oh, but how did you have video attached to it?
No, I've always had to do it this way.
Yeah.
I'm sure there's a much
Yeah,
cleaner
he
way
just-
to do it.
He just
The way I
he just put it on the screen for a second.
Oh.
He wants to listen. Guapo's just giving insight to how he operates to all the people out
That's
there.
news to me right
Okay,
there.
well, he wants to educate you as well.
Well, I can. I wish he would have told me sooner. I can help him set up a closing.
How
or
was
whatever.
Big Bet, guys? I didn't even
Oh,
ask.
it was amazing, dude.
Good. Yeah, it was really
You-
good.
You've
yeah.
had your little like Zen retreat. You're all.
Zen's one word.
I don't know if Zen was right. We worked a lot.
We did.
Oh,
We
yeah?
were busy. Like literally from the time we got there to the time we left, we were doing something.
But
But it was like
it was very productive.
It was fun, busy
Yep.
work. You know
Okay.
what I
Yeah, it
mean?
was. It
We
was
got to
fun because we were-
study. We
right.
played games. Went out to dinner.
Yeah,
Because
we-
I read those texts where I guess you guys were doing some sort of game where it was like an autocorrect.
Yeah,
thing.
you let your phone fill it in.
Why don't
Right.
you tell
'Cause
why we were doing that, Matt?
I don't know why you were doing that, but I read that in the group chat and I was like, I was reading all of this stuff and I was like, what are they all
He's
saying?
like, you're all stroking out
Yeah,
at
I
the
was
same
like,
time.
I said, are you guys all having a stroke at the same time? Eventually, I figured it out. I was like, oh, they must be doing an autocorrect thing because these sentences don't look like they make sense.
Yeah.
Like there was stuff that didn't seem grammatically correct, and I was like, what is going on here? But it was like a whole wall of text in the group chat of just complete nonsense to me. I just
That was
couldn't-
that was a perfect layup for a segue to get us out of here, Matt. We are giving away a WPT cruise package this Friday. Everybody who's a subscriber and or member will be eligible to win as long as you guys are here. We're gonna pull 5 of you actually from the chat to compete in a little trivia game that we have set up. Members will have additional luck, you know, as a thank you for being a member to the S4Y community.
giving away luck.
Well, yeah, essentially.
I mean, can I have some?
Are you a sub?
Are you a member to the
Yeah, do you pay
YouTube channel?
$5
Maybe not actually. I don't-
$5.
$5.
Okay.
$5 for a little luck.
Yeah, that's a steal.
But it's a $4,500 value. These are the WPT Voyage or Virgin Voyage cruise. This is going to be in April. They're going to be running a prime main event as well as some other secondary events. They have 90 tables dedicated to this. So basically, the entire cruise ship is going to be dedicated to a WPT event. I think it's going to be a ton of fun. You guys are going to have a chance at that $4,500 value. Show up Friday. I think we're going to be coming live at 6 p.m. Pacific. In the meantime, if you go engage with the Twitter that Matt was referencing, we have a little fill in the blank with your phone type of challenge on our Twitter. It's a viral thing going on right now. You know, the original one was misogyny check, and it says women are, and then you let your phone fill in the rest. We did a shit reg check. Let your phone complete the sentence, I hate poker.
Oh, that's fun.
And go ahead and get yourself in there. Really, the whole reason why we're promoting the tweet is just to remind people that we will be giving away the seat on Friday, but we appreciate all the engagement that you guys give us. So that's going to do it for us today. We're going to be back again tomorrow at noon Pacific. We're starting on time, God damn it. We ran into some issues today getting reset up after we packed everything up and went to Big Bear. But noon tomorrow,
I'll believe
Thursday.
it when I see it.
It'll happen.
Lock it in. Put it on the board. Book it. We're doing it. Noon tomorrow. We're going to be joined by, I believe, Nikki and Melissa again. Either tomorrow or Friday. I'm not sure. I don't know what's going on anymore. Where's our EP? Let us know. But then Friday is going to be the trivia giveaway game. So be sure to tune in for that as well. We'll see you guys all then.
Peace.